Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get in the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create. Hey friend, welcome back to this week's episode of Distribution First. We are continuing our series on the Distribution First framework and going through each phase piece by piece. We've already gone through phase 1 and phase 2 on building that foundation strategy and then starting to execute. And now in this week's episode, we are going to dive deep into phase 3, which is optimization. So by the time you've hit this phase, you've typically built up 2 muscles. The first muscle you've built up is proper planning. That all comes in phase 1. And the second phase is you started to remix your long form content into platform native versions that you can start to distribute. So those are the 2 muscles hopefully you've started to build up in phase 1 and phase 2. You know where you're headed, you've got your plan, and you know how to properly execute on that content. Now that you've got that initial flywheel in place, you've gone back to your archive and you've started to fine tune and look at what content you have that you can start repurposing. Now's the time to start looking at, all right, we've started executing. What are we trying to go after? And then how do we do this in a repeatable way? How do we optimize this system? It's one thing to be able to go in and kind of do this one at a time, but it's another thing to be able to do this in a repeatable process. When I work with a client or with folks inside the Distribution First community, I want to tackle 3 high-level goals. We focus on 3 goals. They're number 1, profitability. Profitability is all about reducing that creation cost and increasing the amount of impressions that you're getting on every piece of content. So we want to, if we're spending money on a freelancer or even spending money on an in-house marketer to create something, we want to be thinking about how do we make this as profitable as possible and how do we get as much out of this one piece of content as we can. The second goal at a high level that we're looking at is scalability. And it fits right in with profitability, but scalability is all about how do we get more spread? How do we amplify this content? So not only are we going to save money, but we're going to amplify this content without having to spend more on ads or creating new content or any of those type of things. We're going to be able to take what we have, distribute it effectively at scale. And the third one is super underrated. The third goal that we're trying to go after is risk management. And that means we're diversifying our distribution channels beyond our typical Google or LinkedIn playbook. So if anything changes on those algorithms, we have a backup plan to be able to use. And typically I look at that in 3 different areas. I look at that as a rented channel, so something like LinkedIn. I look at that as an SEO channel, so something like search, Google, YouTube. And then I look at that as an owned channel, so something like a community or an email newsletter or a video library, stuff that you're sort of getting people to subscribe into, that they're opting into for you and that you kind of own more so than those other channels. And really all of the specific goals are drawn out of those 3 depending on your channels, your content types, the things that you and your team create. I can't tell you, hey, you've got to measure impressions over revenue. Or I can't tell you, hey, you should really check out this thing versus that as far as you know what types of content you're creating, what channels you're distributing that content on. And only you and your team will be able to really map out what that looks like for you. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to measure a blog in the same way that you would measure your podcast. And I can't tell you to measure a podcast if you don't have a podcast. So it's really up to you to take those specific things. But whatever content you are creating and whatever channels you're creating them, how can you create a set of goals that focuses on reducing the ROI that it costs so you're profitable? How do you focus on scalability so you can actually get those things in front of the audience? And then really risk management. So how do we diversify what we've got so we can distribute our content on more channels than just the 1 or 2 that we're using right now? Part of our job is to figure out that nuance. I do want to say that using this data to tell a better story is part of our job. This is what we have to do with clients, with leadership, with executives. We have to be able to tell a story, to be able to share what we have, what we're trying to go after, why we're trying to do this whole distribution first thing in the first place, beyond what we're doing. And sometimes that is the hard work. That's the work that we have to do, is figure out, all right, how can I tell a story? How can I show what I've been working on that isn't working? How can I show this is where we're trying to get to and what we're trying to do? And how can we focus more on distribution and repurposing versus just creating new content all the time? With that in mind, let's now move on to optimizing your distribution system. When I think about optimizing a distribution system, it really comes down to 3 different areas. And the first one is all about adding distribution to your content roadmap. And now's the time to really integrate that distribution first mindset into your actual editorial calendar. So you might have gone back in the execution phase and started repurposing and distributing some of this content, but now we're going to get really proactive. Whatever editorial calendar you're using, however you're planning out content, whether it's Asana, whether it's Notion, whether it's a Google Sheet, whatever that is, we want to be able to put distribution first. And this is where we do start to put distribution first. We don't want to make distribution an afterthought anymore. It's actually going to be a strategic part of your planning process. When mapping out your content plan, here are a few things that I like to include to make sure that distribution is at the forefront of what I'm doing. So if I've got topics that I'm trying to create, I want to understand what micro content is going to come off of that. And I'm going to plan that ahead of time. If I'm going to write an email, I want to know about it. If I'm going to write a few social posts for LinkedIn, I want to know about it. If I'm going to be creating a webinar on this, I want to know about it. I want to plan for that ahead of time. I want to know what type of content that is. Is this a core piece of content that's part of our regular strategy? Is this something that we're going to cut and put on social? Or is this going to be built up into something that's a bigger piece for future? And I want to know what themes and points of view those types of content are going to talk about. So really building a campaign around those specific themes or those points of view. So when I go to look back, I can see exactly where I've been talking about specific messages throughout my content. So if you remember in phase 1, we really dove into those POVs and those messages, and this is where those start to resurface. We've built those out, and now we're going to ensure that we get those mapped ahead of time. And then obviously the channels, where are we going to share these at? How is traffic going to see it? We want to be thinking about that ahead of time. So if we're writing a blog, is this blog going to actually rank? If not, how are we going to get it in front of our audience? Is it more thought leadership? Okay, we need to have a distribution plan in place to be able to make sure that content gets in front of the audience. And this way, it sounds super complicated. It's not. I actually have a templated roadmap that folks inside the community get, but you don't have to overcomplicate it. It could be as simple as creating a few tags and a few different sections within your project management system. But this way, every piece of content you produce has a clear path to reach your audience. And you have a clear path to know and be able to show to your leadership and to your clients where the content is going after you hit publish. All right, step 2 is creating momentum across your channels. So this is where, as we start to optimize, we start to really hone in on consistency, because consistency is key in your content distribution. You need to be able to build a rhythm that your audience can engage with and start to look forward to what you're going to produce. And that could take place across any channel and any medium. Do you send an email every Saturday? Do you post on LinkedIn every Wednesday? Do you promote your podcast on Tuesday mornings? Whatever your schedule is, you don't have to tell your audience. You can tell your audience, this is what we do, expect X, Y, and Z every single day, or expect this on Saturdays. You can do that, but you don't have to. The goal is to be able to have some level of consistency that you start to hit and that your audience starts to look forward to. So there are certain newsletters that I'm subscribed to that I look forward to reading on a certain day at a certain time. It starts to become part of my habit. Whether that's Thursday afternoon, I know a certain email is going to come in and I'm excited to read that the next morning on Friday morning before I get started. Or there might be a particular podcast that comes out every Tuesday. I'm super excited. I can't wait for that to come out every Tuesday. That is what you're trying to hit with your level of consistency, not only across your publishing schedule, your main publishing schedule, like a podcast or a YouTube video, but your distribution as well. So how are you distributing it? That every Tuesday, we're going to post the promo video for X, Y, and Z, that type of thing. And regularly posting across multiple platforms is what is going to make sure that your content remains top of mind and you remain top of mind for your audience, no matter where they're spending their time. So that's where we want to diversify that mix of channels. So no matter where they're spending time, if they're more in email this week, you're going to get an email. If they're more on social, they're going to get something from you there as well. You want to be in front of them. And the third and probably biggest piece of all of this is actually becoming proactive, because a distribution calendar is your roadmap to long-term engagement and long-term success. So instead of scrambling to promote your content after it's published, you're planning ahead and then executing the plan. That's the goal. You want to plan ahead and execute the plan. So here are 3 tips that I would use and actually give my clients on a regular basis to be able to become more proactive. So number 1 is scheduling regular posts. So create a baseline flow of content by scheduling your distribution in advance. So this content typically comes from your regular content programs like your blogs, your webinars, or your podcasts. And this is what will help nurture your audience and probably should be about 50 to 80% of what you distribute. So I would call this regular scheduled programming. So you have a regular drumbeat of content that you're distributing every single week, whether that's 50% or 80% of your time. And then that leaves you another 20 to 50% to play around with when something you see inspires you, or you just want to be able to create something off the spot. But for the most part, having a schedule that you follow is going to help you become way, way more consistent than just hoping inspiration hits or hoping you're going to sort of get all that figured out every single week over and over again. We all know that stuff comes up. We all know that life gets crazy and it's really hard to be consistent if you don't have things scheduled. So I would highly, highly suggest you start scheduling your regularly scheduled programming and actually batching out that content that you created. So if you know you've got to create a whole bunch of social posts, try to batch those out at the same time. If you know you have to write a newsletter, actually schedule that time on your calendar so you can write that every single week and it can be pretty consistent versus, well, I'll just find the time to do it this week. It's going to be way better if you have that scheduled out. The second way to become more proactive is to coordinate everything that needs distribution. So there's way more than just your content marketing efforts that need distribution at any given company. Think about things like product updates, sales needs, HR needs some culture posts. All of these things come into play. And so the more that you can plan any of your major content releases around strategic dates and coordinate your work ahead of time, that way you're not left scrambling to try and send out 3 different emails about 3 different things to the same group or post too many things that are way too promotional at one time. You can really schedule those things out and figure out the mix. So again, understand everything that needs to be distributed within your organization. And the more that you can do that, again, it's going to be difficult at first, but the more you can do that and work with people across your organization to know what's coming out and try to coordinate those things, the better you're going to be, again, proactive ahead so your distribution calendar stays on track. And then speaking of on track, the third one, the final one, is just track and adjust. So we go into all of these things understanding that nothing is perfect, everything is changing, and we certainly aren't going to get this right from the get-go. So regularly reviewing your calendar is really going to help you to see what's working and what's not. And then you can use those insights to refine your strategy and improve your results. Because phase 3 optimization, it isn't just about doing more stuff. It's actually about how do you execute better on the things you're doing. That's the whole goal of optimization. And so when you can strategically plan your distribution, maintain momentum across those platforms, and then become a proactive marketer, scheduling your content, scheduling your distribution, you're finally going to set yourself up for success. So hopefully this episode helped get you some clarity on how to better optimize your content distribution moving forward. If I could just summarize it for you, it's being able to take all the things you did in phase 2, executing that, plan it to be proactive, and then from there, once you understand your goals and how you're going to measure it, tracking towards success. So how do we optimize what we're doing for efficiency, obviously, but then also to hit our goals and make sure that we're achieving what we're trying to do. So phase 3, optimizing what you got. Next time, we are going to dive into phase 4, which is all about maximizing. This is fun. Maximizing is a really cool part. It's where the light at the tunnel really starts to happen, because by the time you've hit maximization, you've built up all of these muscles, and now you're just ready to dump even more gasoline on the fire and say, all right, how do we really scale this thing? So I am pumped to be able to talk about that next time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can shoot me a DM. I will always reach back out. And thanks as always for listening, and I will see you next week. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode one way or another into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.